Miss Johnson, take your backpack and step outside.
Obrigada por
The
vir,
words
tia.
landed
Eu
like a
tava com
slap
medo.
in the middle
Você não
of
tá
third period
sozinho, viu?
chemistry,
Vai dar tudo
echoing in the
certo.
sudden silence of the classroom. Alyssa didn't move. Her hand was frozen mid-sentence in her notebook, where she'd been copying down the reaction of potassium with water. A small curl of her hair fell into her eyes, and she brushed it back, slowly, as if her brain needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Now, repeated Ms. Redmond, the teacher, her arms folded. You know what this is about. Whispers stirred behind her, spreading like wildfire through the rows of desks. Alyssa glanced around. Faces turned away when her eyes met theirs. Some smirked. A few looked confused. No one spoke up. Even Mia, her lab partner and supposed friend, suddenly found something deeply interesting in her calculator screen. Alyssa stood slowly, her heart thudding in her ears. I don't know what this is about, she said, voice even. Can you tell me why I'm being asked to leave class? That's not for me to discuss. The administration has requested you be brought to the office. Let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be. Ms. Redmond's voice was clipped and precise, the same tone she used when telling students to tuck in their shirts or to stop chewing gum. But Alyssa heard something underneath it, a kind of rehearsed detachment, as if Ms. Redmond didn't quite believe what she was doing, but had decided it wasn't worth challenging. Alyssa packed her bag, painfully aware of every movement, every breath. She walked to the door, and just before stepping out, she heard a boy in the back mutter under his breath, "Guess someone finally got tired of Miss Perfect." Laughter, quick and sharp, the kind that cuts deep. Alyssa didn't turn around. Outside, the hallway was empty. Waiting for her was Mr. Feldman, the school security officer, his arms crossed, his radio clipped tightly to his shoulder. His presence sent a cold shock through her. No one ever got escorted by security unless it was something serious, or something meant to look serious. Let's go, he said, not unkindly. They walked in silence past rows of lockers and shut doors. Alyssa's breath felt thin in her chest. This had to be a mistake. She had never skipped class, never mouthed off to a teacher, never even been late. Her record was spotless. She was in the top 5% of her class, president of the debate team, member of National Honor Society. How could? As they reached the front office, she saw two assistant principals standing stiffly by the reception desk. Mrs. Jenkins, the school secretary, refused to meet her eyes. The receptionist looked down, lips pursed. Someone was definitely watching. Inside the principal's conference room, the AI was too cold, the lights too bright. Vice Principal Margaret Collins sat at the head of the long table, flipping through a manila folder. Her thin, sharp mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Alyssa Johnson," she said, without looking up. "Please have a seat." Alyssa sat. The chair felt lower than it should be, tilting her slightly downward, like a defendant in a courtroom. Her backpack sat on her lap like a shield. "I'll be brief," said Ms. Collins, closing the folder. "Over the past few weeks, a pattern of concerning behavior has been brought to our attention. Disruption in class, insubordination, intimidating conduct towards staff and students." Alyssa blinked. "Excuse me? You've interrupted teachers. You've challenged classroom rules. You've made peers feel uncomfortable." "That's not true," Alyssa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I haven't done any of those things. I've never even. This has to be a mistake." Margaret Collins looked directly at her for the first time. Her gaze was cool, almost bored. "We've reviewed multiple reports. This isn't up for debate." "What reports? From who?" Alyssa's throat tightened. "Can I see them? This is an administrative matter. We are not required to share internal documentation with students." Alyssa turned to the assistant principal beside her, Mr. Leonard. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You know me," she said. "You've known me since freshman year. Does this sound like something I would do?" He shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't personal, Alyssa." Margaret slid a form across the table. "Effective immediately, you are being removed from Lincoln Heights High School for behavior deemed detrimental to the school environment. This is not a permanent expulsion. You will be referred to an alternative education program. Alyssa stared at the paper. Her name, her student ID, the word removal, stamped across the top in bold red ink. This can't be happening, she whispered. No student is above the rules, Margaret Collins said. Even those with impressive GPAs. Is this because I spoke up about the lack of books in the debate room? Or when I asked why the history curriculum skips the civil rights movement after 1 week? Margaret's smile was thin. You've made a habit of challenging authority. That's not always productive in an academic environment. You mean I asked questions you didn't like? Alyssa shot back. That's not disruption, that's critical thinking. Mr. Leonard finally looked up. Alyssa, please, just go home. We'll be in touch. Tears threatened, hot behind her eyes. Not yet. She wouldn't let them see her cry. Security escorted her back through the hallway. This time, students had been released for lunch, and the hall was full. Phones were out. Someone took a picture. Someone else laughed. Damn, she heard. She really thought she was better than everybody. By the time she reached the parking lot, her hands were shaking. She sat on the curb, staring at the sidewalk, trying to breathe. She'd done everything right, and it didn't matter. She walked the 12 blocks home in silence. Every step felt heavier than the last. She didn't call her mom. She didn't text anyone. She didn't even cry. Her face was a mask by the time she opened the front door and stepped into the quiet warmth of her home. Hey, sweetie, you're home early? Called Renee from the kitchen. Alyssa didn't answer. She dropped her backpack, sat on the couch, and stared at the floor. Renee walked in, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes immediately narrowed. Alyssa, they expelled me. The silence that followed was louder than the cafeteria during lunchtime. Renee's towel dropped. What did you just say? Alyssa lifted her eyes. They were dry, but full of fury. They kicked me out, said I was a threat to the environment. Renee walked over slowly, sat beside her. What happened? They said I disrupted class, that I made people uncomfortable, that I challenged authority. But they didn't show any proof. No warnings, no referrals. Nothing. Did they say what incidents they were referring to? No. Just multiple reports. But I know what this is. It's because I don't smile when teachers say ignorant things. It's because I ask questions. It's because I'm a black girl who speaks up. Renee said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, who was in the room? Vice Principal Collins. Mr. Leonard. Security. No parents. No advocate. Renee's jaw tightened. They violated due process. Alyssa looked up, startled. What? They're required to notify a guardian before any disciplinary action at that level. And to give you access to the evidence. They didn't, which means they've already made mistakes. Alyssa blinked. How do you know that? Renee stood, calm but steely. Because I helped write the guidelines. Because I've overseen investigations into schools that pulled this exact same stunt. And because I know what discrimination wrapped in bureaucracy looks like. Alyssa stared. Mom. What are you saying? Renee walked to the hallway closet, pulled out a locked briefcase, and set it on the table. She turned to face her daughter. Her voice was firm, cold. I'm saying they messed with the wrong family. That night, Alyssa didn't eat dinner. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched plate, while her mother moved silently between the cabinets and the dining room, collecting folders, unlocking drawers, pulling out papers thick with legal language. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of documents being stacked with precision. Do you want to tell me everything now? Renee asked gently. Alyssa didn't respond at first. She pushed her plate slightly forward, her appetite long gone. I already told you what happened. I need every detail, Renee said, sitting across from her with a legal pad in hand. Not just what they said, what you saw, how they acted, everything you remember. So Alyssa began again. From the moment she was pulled from chemistry class to the way Miss Collins had spoken to her like she was a problem already decided. She described the tone, the lack of evidence, the absence of any warning. Renee didn't interrupt, only took notes with a pen that barely made a sound. Her face stayed still, but her eyes burned with something dangerous. Not rage, but a kind of sharpened clarity that only surfaced when she'd seen something before. When Alyssa finally finished, Renee looked down at the paper, then back up. They're hiding something. You think so? Alyssa asked, her voice low. Renee leaned forward. Sweetheart, schools don't expel top students out of nowhere unless they're protecting something, or someone. That entire meeting today was structured to intimidate you. They didn't follow due process. They didn't document anything transparently. And you weren't even given a chance to respond. They acted like I was a threat, Alyssa muttered. Like I was dangerous. Renee's lips tightened. That language, threat to the environment. It's vague by design. You can apply it to anything. That's why schools use it when they want to remove a student without legal grounds. But here's the thing. They used it on the wrong person. Alyssa looked up. You're going to do something, aren't you? I already am. That night, long after Alyssa had gone to bed, Renee stayed at the dining table, surrounded by legal binders and printed statutes. She pulled up archived emails, state policy codes, previous cases she'd been assigned over the past 10 years. She made phone calls to people who owed her favors, quietly asked about Lincoln Heights' disciplinary patterns. By 2 a.m., she had a list of other students, mostly Black and Latino, who had been removed over the past 3 years under similarly vague accusations. Some had records attached. Some didn't. Some had simply disappeared. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Renee called the State Department of Education. I'm invoking emergency authority under Article 16, she said calmly. I'm requesting a formal administrative hearing under district oversight to take place on-site at Lincoln Heights High School within 48 hours. The official on the other end paused. Is this about a student case? It's about a systemic abuse of discretion, Renee replied. And yes, one of the students is my daughter. By 9 a.m., Lincoln Heights High School was buzzing. Unmarked government vehicles pulled into the front lot. Men and women in dark suits with badges stepped out and entered the building without fanfare. Students watched through the windows whispering. Phones came out. Rumors spread. Is it a drug bust? Someone asked. No, said another. It's about that girl, Alyssa Johnson. She brought the feds. In the main office, Margaret Collins looked up from her desk as Renee Johnson entered, wearing a tailored navy suit and holding a leather portfolio. Behind her stood 2 representatives from the state board, both with clipboards and stern expressions. Margaret stood, eyes narrowing. Mrs. Johnson. Superintendent Johnson, Renee corrected. We're here for the emergency hearing. I assume you've prepared the requested documents. Margaret glanced at Mr. Leonard, who looked like he might faint. We weren't informed. You were... Renee cut in. The notification went to the district superintendent at 6:47 this morning, and your office was CC'd. I have confirmation of receipt. Margaret's lips pressed into a tight line. This feels highly irregular. No, Renee said, stepping closer. What's irregular is expelling a student without evidence, without a guardian present, and without following legal due process. What's irregular is that your school has the highest rate of disciplinary removals for Black students in the entire district, something you've never reported to the state. What's irregular is that I had to come here personally to uncover what should have never happened in the first place. A heavy silence fell. In the auditorium, chairs were being set up for the hearing. Teachers were told to send certain students to a modified schedule. The atmosphere turned tense. Staff whispered in corners. Someone tried to call the union rep. Others kept their heads down, pretending nothing was happening. Alyssa arrived through the side entrance. She wasn't wearing her school uniform anymore. She wore jeans, a black blouse, and a thin silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. She held her head high as she walked past students in the hall. Some gawked, some looked away, but no one laughed this time. In the auditorium, a table was set up at the front. Renee stood beside her daughter, calm and composed. Margaret and Mr. Leonard sat across from them, flanked by a district legal advisor who looked like he hadn't slept. The room filled slowly with staff, a few parents, and 2 board members seated to oversee the hearing. One of the state reps opened the session. "We're here to review allegations of misconduct in the administrative handling of student Alyssa Johnson's disciplinary case, as well as any patterns of systemic discrimination present in Lincoln Heights High School. Superintendent Renee Johnson will present the initial findings." Renee stood. "Thank you. I'll begin with a statement." She opened her folder, but didn't read from it. "My daughter was expelled without cause. That would be enough to warrant a response. But this isn't just about her. Over the past 3 years, this school has removed more students of color than any other school in the district, often using vague language like threat to the environment. Most of these cases lack documentation. Several have no records at all. That's not just unethical. It's illegal." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I have records of at least 7 students removed under similar conditions. 5 of them never returned to public education. 3 were under 16, which makes their removal a violation of compulsory attendance laws. And not one of those cases involved documented incidents of violence or formal complaints. What they do have in common," she paused, "is race." Margaret spoke up then. "This is a smear campaign. The school has done nothing illegal. We followed protocol." "Then show us the paperwork," Renee said coolly. "Show us the referrals, the teacher reports, the parent notifications. Show us the official reviews. If you have nothing to hide, it should be easy." Margaret hesitated. Mr. Leonard cleared his throat. "We may have gaps in some records." "Convenient," Renee replied, "but not acceptable." Then she turned to the audience. "My daughter is not perfect. No student is. But she was targeted not for what she did but for who she is. For asking questions. For being too visible. For making some people uncomfortable simply by existing in a space that wasn't built with her in mind." Alyssa sat still, her hands in her lap. She didn't need to speak. The room could feel the truth radiating from her silence. One of the board members finally spoke. "We're going to need full access to school disciplinary records for the past 5 years. And we're placing this administration under immediate review." Margaret paled. "That's highly irregular." "You've said that before," Renee interrupted. "But in reality, it's long overdue." As the hearing adjourned, Alyssa walked out of the auditorium with her mother beside her. A few students watched from the hallways. One teacher, Ms. Harris, the only black woman on staff, gave Alyssa a small nod. It was quiet, but it meant everything. Back in the car, Alyssa finally exhaled. "Does this mean I'm going back?" she asked. "Not just yet," Renee said. "But when you do, it won't be on their terms." The district audit team arrived on a Monday morning with clipboards, laptops, and solemn expressions. There were no announcements, no warnings. They stationed themselves in the library, the teacher's lounge, even in the back of classrooms, quietly observing how discipline was managed, how students were spoken to, how policies were applied. The atmosphere at Lincoln Heights changed instantly. Teachers avoided eye contact. Secretaries whispered. The principal suddenly took emergency leave. Vice Principal Margaret Collins was left as the acting authority, and the pressure showed in the way her voice cracked over the intercom, the way she rushed to intercept every question from faculty, every parent concern. Alyssa watched it all unfold from home. She wasn't yet allowed back on campus, not officially, but she received updates through friends who were finally willing to speak to her again now that her name was clearing. Some apologized, some didn't, but the tone had shifted. People were starting to understand something bigger was happening. And then, on Wednesday morning, Renee called Alyssa into the living room. She had a file open on her laptop and a printout in her hand. Her face was tight, unreadable. "I want you to see this," she said, turning the screen toward her daughter. On it was a scanned PDF, a complaint, filed 2 years ago, by a parent named Evelyn Ortiz. Her son, Carlos, had been suspended twice and then referred to a behavioral program for an incident involving a hallway monitor. No physical altercation, no verbal threats, just defiance. Alyssa read through it. I don't remember him. He was in your grade. Transferred out sophomore year. His mother submitted multiple appeals. Never got a response. I dug this out of the department's old complaint archives. Someone flagged it for lack of merit and shelved it without follow-up. And now, Alyssa asked. Renee handed her the printout. There are 7 other cases just like his. Same school. Same patterns. Vague charges, rushed removals, most of them students of color. None of the students were ever reinstated. All the cases were flagged internally but never investigated. And there's one more thing. She paused. All of the removals happened under Margaret Collins. Alyssa stared at her. Are you saying she's been doing this for years? I'm saying she's been enabled to do it for years. Every removal she filed was signed off by someone higher, someone who helped cover the gaps in paperwork. The records were manipulated. Parent contacts falsified. In some cases, student incident logs were edited after the fact. But why? Because, Renee said, her voice quiet and deadly calm. Removing students labeled as disruptive boosts a school's performance metrics. The fewer problem students on paper, the better the school appears for funding. And if those students happen to be Black or Latino, that's collateral damage they never expected to answer for. Until now. Alyssa felt a chill crawl down her spine. So I was just another number to her. You were a threat, Alyssa. Not because of what you did, but because of what you knew. Because you asked too many questions, because you were too visible, too articulate. They couldn't paint you as violent, so they painted you as difficult. It's what institutions do when they feel their power being questioned. Alyssa sat back on the couch, stunned. The pieces were falling into place. Not just about her own experience, but about the entire machine that had quietly moved against her and others without anyone noticing or caring. What happens now? She asked. We go public, Renee said. Tomorrow. The next day, a press conference was held on the steps of the Lincoln Heights district office. Renee stood at the podium, flanked by civil rights attorneys, state investigators, and 3 parents of former students who had come forward. Alyssa stood behind her, still and strong. Cameras flashed. Microphones bristled. Reporters leaned forward. Over the past 3 years, Renee began, Lincoln Heights High School has engaged in a pattern of discriminatory discipline practices designed to remove students of color under false pretenses. This was done not in the interest of safety or education, but to manipulate school performance data and suppress voices that dared to question authority. She lifted a folder, held it high. These are internal documents, recovered and reviewed by our office, showing clear evidence of racial disparity in expulsions, falsified documentation, and deliberate obstruction of appeals. These practices were not only unethical, they were illegal. Reporters shouted questions. Who is responsible? What about the current vice principal? Will there be criminal charges? Renee remained composed. Investigations are ongoing, but we will pursue every legal avenue to ensure that those responsible are held accountable. No more students will be lost to this system without a fight. That night, the story aired on local news. The footage showed Renee's speech, then cut to a clip of Margaret Collins entering her car, face tense, refusing to speak. By morning, parents were flooding the district with calls. A student-led walkout was planned for the following week. Alyssa's inbox filled with messages, some from strangers, some from students she hadn't spoken to in months. One said, "You gave us a voice." Another read simply, "I believe you now," but not all responses were kind. One anonymous message called her a liar. Another accused her of trying to destroy good teachers for her own agenda. Alyssa closed the messages and sat in silence, the weight of attention pressing on her. "You okay?" Renee asked that evening, gently setting a cup of tea next to her. "I didn't think it would be this big," Alyssa admitted. "You did the right thing," her mother said, "even when the right thing is uncomfortable." The following Monday, the school board held a public disciplinary hearing for Margaret Collins. The auditorium was full. Parents, teachers, board members, even some media. Alyssa was seated in the front row. When Margaret walked in, the room fell silent. She no longer wore the confident expression from before. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Her hair was pinned back tightly, as if trying to hold together what remained of her composure. She sat at the table and opened a file, her hands trembling just enough for Alyssa to notice. The board chair opened the proceedings. "We are reviewing formal complaints against Vice Principal Collins regarding misconduct, violation of district policy, and discriminatory disciplinary practices." A pause. "Ms. Collins, do you have a statement?" Margaret looked up, her voice low but clear. "I did what I thought was best to keep the school focused and disciplined. I followed procedures as I understood them. I never intended harm." "You targeted students based on race," one board member said flatly. "You removed them without due process." "I was under pressure to reduce behavioral incidents," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "We were told to clean up the data." "By whom?" Silence. "I don't think I can answer that without counsel." Murmurs filled the room. Alyssa stared at her, realizing something she hadn't expected. Margaret Collins had never been the top of the food chain. She had been a willing tool, yes, but she had answered to someone higher, someone still hidden, still safe. For now, the board voted to suspend Collins indefinitely, pending further investigation. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out without a word. As she passed Alyssa, their eyes met. For the first time, Alyssa didn't see authority or power. She saw fear, not of Alyssa but of what she had exposed. Outside, the cold December wind hit hard. Alyssa zipped her jacket up, her breath visible in the air. Renee joined her. They stood in silence, watching cars pull away from the school. "It's not over, is it?" Alyssa asked. Renee shook her head. "No, but you made sure it started." And somewhere deep inside, Alyssa felt the weight begin to lift. Not because it was finished, but because she had chosen to face it. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth. And that was enough for now. The halls of Lincoln Heights High School had never been quieter. After Margaret Collins' suspension, the school entered a strange kind of limbo, functioning, but without direction. The remaining administrators moved cautiously, as if the walls had ears. Teachers whispered instead of speaking freely. Students watched everything. And for the first time in years, people were asking questions out loud, not just in their heads. Alyssa returned to campus the following Monday, not as a student, not yet, but as an observer. The state had ordered a temporary halt to all punitive removals while the investigation continued, and Renee was assigned to oversee compliance until the district appointed an interim monitor. It was awkward, walking through the front doors again, not as someone accused, but as someone vindicated. Some students gave her wide-eyed glances, others looked away, unsure of how to act around the girl who had nearly brought down half the administration. But there were also smiles, nods, quiet words of solidarity. Alyssa moved through the building with a quiet calm, taking it all in. She saw the changes immediately. Posters about equity and student voice had appeared overnight, like band-aids on a wound. The guidance counselor, Mr. Bellamy, who had avoided her during the ordeal, now tried to catch her in the hallway with forced warmth. "Good to see you back, Alyssa. We missed your leadership." She gave him a look that made it clear she remembered everything. He quickly moved on. That afternoon, in a closed meeting with district officials and Renee, Alyssa sat beside her mother as new policy drafts were reviewed. Terms like restorative justice, bias training, and disciplinary transparency floated across the room like promises. Alyssa listened carefully, but something in her stayed skeptical. Policies were easy. Enforcement was hard. And she knew, better than anyone, that the problem had never been about paperwork. It was about people. After the meeting, she sat with Renee in the car, neither of them starting the engine. Outside, teachers filed out of the building, most too caught up in their own thoughts to notice the black SUV parked by the curb. "It's strange," Alyssa said quietly, watching them. "I used to think they all had power, that the adults were the ones controlling everything. But most of them were just scared, silent." Renee glanced at her. "That's how institutions survive. Not through the power of the few, but the silence of the many. Alyssa nodded. So how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Renee exhaled, looking out the windshield. We don't just change rules. We change culture. And that takes time. And voices. Voices like yours. For the first time, Alyssa didn't feel like just a student anymore. She felt like something else. Someone standing at the edge of something larger than herself. That night, she sat on her bed, laptop open, cursor blinking on a blank page. She began writing, not for class, not for anyone else, but for herself. She wrote everything. The humiliation, the fear, the confusion, and then the resistance, the awakening. She didn't know if it would ever be published. She didn't care. She just needed it to exist. Meanwhile, the investigation kept unfolding. A month after the press conference, the district publicly released a summary of findings. 12 cases of disciplinary removals were deemed unlawful. 2 administrators had resigned quietly. A third was placed under federal review for obstruction. Margaret Collins, now officially terminated, had vanished from public life. The media had moved on to other stories, but for those inside the school, the shift was irreversible. Alyssa's story had cracked something open, and from that crack, others began to speak. Students came forward with their own experiences, not just about expulsion, but about daily microaggressions, slights that added up over time. Parents began attending board meetings, demanding transparency. Teachers, once too afraid to challenge authority, started voicing concerns in staff meetings. But change, as always, moved slowly. One afternoon, Alyssa was invited to speak at a district town hall. She sat backstage, hands clasped tightly, heart pounding. When her name was called, she walked to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Parents, teachers, students, reporters, all waiting. I didn't want to be here, she began, her voice calm but firm. Not like this. I didn't want to become the girl who got expelled. I just wanted to graduate, get into college, maybe do something good in the world. But this school made me something else. It made me proof. Proof that you can be perfect on paper and still be seen as a problem. Proof that speaking up can cost you everything. And proof that silence isn't safety. It's surrender. The room was silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. I'm not here to make anyone comfortable, she continued. I'm here because I know there are other students. Students who are scared, who are watching, who are wondering if anyone will stand up for them. This isn't just about policies. It's about people. And it's time we stop pretending otherwise. When she finished, the applause didn't come immediately. It came slowly, starting in the back, then building until the entire room was on its feet. Afterward, a girl approached her. Maybe 14, with braids and wide eyes. She didn't say anything, just handed Alyssa a note. On it, scrawled in pencil, were the words, "Thank you for not disappearing." Alyssa held it in her hand the whole ride home. Winter deepened. Snow settled on the streets of Chicago. The school board passed new disciplinary reforms. Renee was appointed to a special task force on racial equity in education. Alyssa received early acceptance letters from 2 top-tier universities, both with full scholarships. She didn't celebrate right away. She just folded the letters and placed them on her desk, next to the notebook where she had begun writing her account. She knew the work wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. In February, Lincoln Heights held a school-wide assembly, the first in years to be student-led. Alyssa stood backstage again, this time not as a guest, but as part of the organizing team. She looked out through the curtain and saw rows of students, teachers, and even parents in the bleachers. This wasn't just a school anymore. It was a place trying to heal. And maybe, just maybe, it could become something better. Not because of the policies, but because people had decided to stop looking away, and to start seeing each other clearly, finally, for the first time. Spring arrived late in Chicago that year. The snow clung to the sidewalks longer than usual, stubborn against the changing season, as if refusing to admit that the world had moved on. But even beneath the gray slush and frozen wind, there were signs, buds beginning to form on trees, sun lingering just a little longer in the evening, and a kind of quiet shift inside Lincoln Heights High School. The school had changed. Not in dramatic ways. The walls were still lined with faded college posters and student artwork. The same cafeteria food. The same bell schedule. But something in the air was different now, like everyone had taken one collective breath and finally exhaled. Students spoke up more. Teachers listened more. And, most of all, people noticed things they used to ignore. Alyssa walked the hallways again, not as a symbol, not as a scandal, but as a student. Her schedule had been reinstated. Her transcript cleared. Her record officially sealed. But none of those things mattered as much to her as what she saw in the eyes of the younger students, especially the ones who looked like her. They no longer looked away. They looked straight at her, some with pride, some with quiet gratitude. She had become something she never asked to be: visible. On the last day of school before senior graduation, Alyssa sat with her debate coach, Mr. Hamilton, reviewing her final speech. He'd been one of the few adults who had reached out during her suspension, offering support when it still carried a risk. He now looked at her with something close to admiration. "You sure you want to say all that in your valedictorian speech?" he asked, half teasing. Alyssa smiled. "I'm sure." He nodded. "Then say it like you mean it." Graduation day arrived clear and cold. Families filled the bleachers. The seniors sat in rows of maroon gowns, tassels swinging gently in the breeze. When Alyssa's name was called, the cheers were louder than she expected, louder than she thought they'd allow. She walked to the podium, diploma in hand, speech in pocket. But when she got there, she didn't take out the paper. She looked out at the crowd, at her mother in the front row, at the friends who had come back, at the teachers who had learned to listen, and she spoke from memory. "This year taught me a lot," she began, her voice calm and strong. "Not just about books or grades or college applications. Taught me about truth, and power, and silence. I learned that sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing in the middle of a storm and refusing to move. It feels like speaking when your voice shakes. It feels like showing up after you've been pushed out." The stadium was still. Some of us walk through the system believing that if we're perfect enough, polite enough, invisible enough, we'll be safe. But perfection doesn't protect you. Silence doesn't save you. And being invisible never meant being free. I stopped being invisible this year. I was seen in ways I didn't ask for, but also in ways I needed. And I hope you see yourselves too. Clearly, proudly, loudly. She paused, then added quietly, "We deserve to be seen." The crowd rose in a wave of applause. Renee stood, her hands trembling with pride, eyes full of quiet fire. The principal gave a brief closing speech, more cautious, more aware, and the ceremony ended. Caps flew into the air. Laughter echoed across the field. Hugs, photos, promises to stay in touch. Alyssa stood at the edge of the crowd, holding her cap, watching it all. Renee walked over, sunglasses in one hand, phone in the other. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Alyssa replied. "But mostly you." Renee smiled. "You taught them something they won't forget." That night, after the celebration, after the photos and the cake and the text messages from friends and reporters and teachers, Alyssa sat on her bedroom floor, back against the wall, the graduation cap on the floor beside her. She picked up her notebook, the same one she had started during the investigation. She flipped to the last page. She wrote one final line. "They tried to remove me, but I stayed. And by staying, I changed it." She closed the book and sat in silence, letting the moment settle into her skin. Not because everything was fixed, but because she knew now her story mattered. And maybe, just maybe, it would help others see that theirs did too. Thank you for listening to this story all the way through. Your time means something, and the voices within this story speak louder because of it. Now tell me, from where in the world are you listening to this?